is a situation that you should be well familiar with. I am currently waiting for my oven to heat up, and in the meantime, I'm going to talk to you about some broad, crazy philosophical idea that I've been thinking about. In this particular case, that is my sort of predictions, my sort of theory, speculation as to the future of individuality in humans. I'm not necessarily talking, in this particular argument, human doesn't necessarily mean human. As you may well be aware, I'm not particularly a humanist. I try not to think human-centric. I give machines a lot more credit than I think most people give them in terms of what constitutes a consciousness. So who knows what being this actually applies to, but for the sake of ease of communication, let's just assume that it's something very similar to a human, if not like just a future humanity. So my idea is, well, not idea, but how I see things sort of going is a much more flexible new kind of individual, where the boundaries as to where you end and the outside begins, the other begins, is very blurry. For a start, once you transcend the human plane and become sort of much more into a virtual reality, even this can happen now. This is not something that is crazy distant in the future, because this is grounded in solid reality. I mean, you've seen VR chat, right? That no one in VR chat is in there looking like their real selves. No one would even think to do that. I'm sure there's maybe a few people who have done such as scan themselves in, but it's more of just a gimmick, fun thing to do, rather than no one really wants to be themselves in VR chat. Most people are either anime girls or memes, which I think is fucking amazing and is also definitely how the future of humanity is going to go. I'm sure there's some link to gender accelerationism in here where as techno-capital progresses, the male form becomes less relevant and everyone becomes cyber transgender lesbians. I don't know what the fuck that essay is about, but that's something to think about. Either way, but they got slightly off topic there. Back to my point. So no one sticks as themselves, and more importantly, people don't just stick with the same skin all the time. Some people have their sense of identity tied to their skin, but some people, I think the majority of people, switch skins all the time. Just like in any other game, people switch their character skins all the time when they buy new ones, download new ones in games where that's a thing, or just in VR chat it's even simpler because you can create your own skins. So it's ultimately very customizable. I imagine people who have the same, whose personality and themselves is very tied to their particular skin, as kind of similar to people who use a trip on image boards, like a trip code, or some sort of name identification on image boards, where it'll be a sort of rare thing. I'm not sure if it will be necessarily looked down upon in the same way that it is on image boards. I don't think it needs to be, because we're not going for there's not the anonymity that image boards have. It's more of a pseudonymity, so I doubt it will be looked down upon in the same way, but I think it will probably happen with about the same regularity, about the same frequency of people who decide to inextricably link themselves with their skin. And even those people, I don't particularly believe that they will stay with the same thing forever. In real life, no one stays with the same outfit every day. People will probably switch different parts of their avatars out, whether it be something simple like making different models for different outfits. And this floor is incredibly fucking creaky. I'm just gonna stand over here. Whether it be switching out outfits, if it's something more humanoid, or the hairstyles, all that sort of shit, the same thing that you can do in real life, right? I think that would be pretty regular, but even for the most hardened people who stick with just one avatar. But in general, most people change their avatars all the time, because you have freedom of form. So already, the idea of the individual is much looser than it is in reality. Because in reality, yes, there are some ways you can change yourself. As I mentioned before, outfits, hairstyles, makeup, tattoos, body modifications. I mean, even if you want to go super far, you could say there's certain hormone drugs you can take to really change how your body works and your appearance. But that's nowhere near changing your actual form as a human being. Once you get to VR, that becomes a lot more powerful. And I was just listening to this episode of Radio Lab, which is what I do now apparently. They had someone on who was a VR expert who's been doing some studies in VR, which I highly recommend listening to the episode. It's called More or Less Human. A very good episode of Radio Lab. And she was saying, this researcher, that people adapt to, if you put someone in VR and give them a body and a mirror that is very different from their own, they adapt, their brain completely adapts to the new body and sees it as normal in a minute. Even if it's so, you change someone from, she was doing experiments where she was changing people from being she would like scan them in and then change them from male to female or into a woman or into a man, or change the colour of their skin, change their height, if they were a tall person, make them short, and have them just explore themselves, have a mirror, have a world for them to sort of understand, and within a minute, the brain would have accepted the new body. This is the level of flexibility that the human mind's capable of, which is, frankly, great for people like me who want to become less reliant on the concept of form. But what happens once we get even more immersed? Not just the current VR, where it's pretty much just visual and auditory trickery, but perhaps something much closer to full immersion. There's no reason to replicate the reality's reliance on form, and we could go even further than what we currently have in VR chat, especially with regards to communication, because the idea of the individual is the only way two individuals can interact is through some sort of communication. That's what communication is, when two individual things interact with each other, they communicate. And VR opens up a whole load of new avenues for communication, especially if we're at this stage where we're no longer just putting something on the human body, but putting the human body into something else. Then you have a whole host of opportunities for stuff regarding something akin to telepathy or some sort of consciousness melding. See, this is where we get into the really interesting shit about the individual and the collective. Because in general, yes, I share a lot of my theory with individualist anarchy, the sort of my philosophical and political background. Not necessarily. I know a lot of anarcho-capitalist types call themselves individualist anarchists, but they're not. That's bullshit. They're fucking. I'm not talking about that. I mean the sort of sort of anarcho-nihilist kind of insurrectionary kind of all that sort of shit. That's generally where I'm informed from. So people tend to call me an individualist, or sometimes I even think of myself as an individualist, and that may be true, but I guess also because of my background in egoism. So that may be true, yes. In regards to those philosophies, you could call me an individualist. However, if we're talking about individualism and collectivism to be this sort of diametrically opposed, you can't have both at the same time kind of thing, I think that's bullshit. And I especially think that's bullshit when it comes to technology. Because once you've got to the point where something akin to telepathy is possible, where the boundaries between form have been broken down, and the boundaries between where one person's thoughts begin and one person's thoughts end, they break down. There's no longer a black and white boundary between people as individuals. And this is where you might assume that I want some sort of human instrumentality, Evangelion type shit. But this isn't about what I want. This is about what I'm conceiving, predicting. What's the word? You know what I'm speculating. This is just about what, you might think I would think that there would be some sort of merging into one hive mind, and that's possible, but I find it quite unlikely. What I think is we'll see new forms of individuality emerge that we can't really conceive of with the current way that humans work. So, for example, what if you have someone that you're in a very close relationship to, and you could probably just merge your two consciousnesses and become some sort of two consciousness having creature, and then when you don't want to, you can just split again. Everyone is completely free to move and become part of separate consciousnesses. So this is no longer going to be like an individual versus collective thing, because you could have collectives who are massive. I'm sure there will be some people who are members of huge collectives, millions and maybe billions of people strong in this hypothetical scenario, in this fully immersive world where they could have some crazy forms. But just because we think of this in physical terms doesn't mean that almost certainly won't be the same as we're thinking of it, as it's natural to assume. When you naturally assume like a huge mass of consciousnesses, you imagine a huge form of like a massive creature the size of a continent or something. But there is no reason that those number of consciousnesses couldn't fit into a mouse in this hypothetical scenario, something around the same like scale as a mouse. That sort of thing is completely feasible and, if anything, quite likely. And then I don't think individuals will go away as a concept entirely either. Assuming that you choose how much of your brain and power and stuff to share. This is vermouth, not olive oil. Whoops. Assuming that you choose how much of your brain power and stuff to share with other people, which I imagine is how it would work in this sort of scenario. Otherwise, that would be something akin to a horrible breach of privacy. A million times worse than rape. If someone, imagine a literal mind rape, that like this is basically the most unholy thing I could possibly think of. Unholy, most traumatic experience you could possibly have, according to my calculations in my brain. So assuming that this whatever system has something built in to prevent this like that, which would be, if I made it the first thing I did, then there will be people who choose to stay as individuals. Just by the nature of there are so many people on this earth, there will almost certainly be some people who choose to stay as individuals. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. I mean, if there's gonna be groups of different sizes. There's gonna be people who choose to merge their consciousnesses asymmetrically, which is interesting. Imagine that someone who perhaps could choose to perhaps share consciousnesses with someone, but maybe become something akin to their tulpa, where they live within, the other person has full control of the form, but they just live within their consciousness, not really controlling anything, but still observing everything. Imagine, this is the other thing, is that these aren't like permanent things. You can shift any 2 seconds. Imagine, instead of tuning into a Twitch stream, you literally put your consciousness in someone else to observe them, like in Being John Malkovich, where you just become them for a second, or something like that. That could be a feasible thing that people do. It could either be like a Being John Malkovich thing where you become them for a second. It could be you just see out of their eyes, like a real life become part of their consciousness. And remember, there's no form in this hypothetical world, so they could be anything. The possibilities are insanely immense, as just for entertainment alone. And then the drug. It's so crazy. You could drop into someone's consciousness for a second, then you could join a hive mind of 10 billion people for a minute, walk around the earth like that, and then you could leave off and be yourself for a while. And then you can go have a conversation with someone else who is also themselves. Because conversation between individuals where there's certain information being withheld from each party, because Hedgehog's dilemma, you can't get infinitely close to someone because of their AT fields, essentially. If we're taking this Ava analogy all the way, if we're not taking this Ava analogy all the way, the difference between individuals is that certain individuals must consequently have information that the other person doesn't know. Otherwise, if everyone knew everything, literally everything about the other person, they would be like inextricably linked, like psychically and essentially the same consciousness. So I don't think that will go away. The concept of individual conversation has its own merit, almost as an art form. Whether it becomes more or less relevant is something different, but maybe that becomes something akin to I don't know. Maybe that's an activity that people can like partake in. Like you might be part of some hive mind of multiple consciousnesses doing whatever you're doing, living whatever life those sorts of creatures live, and then you might decide to break off and talk with someone one on one. Despite the fact that you've just been sharing your consciousnesses with someone, you may then break off for entertainment purposes just because it's enjoyable to have a conversation where not everyone knows all the facts about everyone else. That like it's a fun thing to do. Or maybe you don't. Maybe that becomes irrelevant once. Maybe that's not fun. Maybe this is so frustrating to go back to once you've developed whatever comes after language that no one does it anymore and it becomes irrelevant. Maybe the individual does become irrelevant. Maybe no one chooses to be individuals anymore. But I don't think that's going to happen. Or if I do think it's going to happen, it's not going to be in the same... like, individual, as I said before, is going to be flexible. There's not just going to be individuals. There'll be people made of people. You could split... It would be incredibly hard to find where one person's mind begins and one person's mind ends. But certain parts would definitely be more concentrated than others. It would be more like a field of various consciousnesses. But rather than them just being like a flat plane of everyone's merged in a sort of soup, it would be more like there are certain hotspots of very strong individuality and certain hotspots where you really can't, it's incredibly vague who is who and what's what. That's how I imagine this future. Now, I say there will be form, but I say there will be some type of form where people will be changing their forms, but this is assuming that it's a VR type setup where there's a physical space that people virtually wander around. If we're talking about this state where people are psychically conveying information and consciousness is emerging, then that sort of thing doesn't even have to exist either. It's incredible to think about the sort of things that could happen. And you know what else is incredible to think about? Imagine the fucking fetishes, man. Imagine the fucking fetishes that were going to arise from this. It's going to be fucking insane. Just think about it. Think about how much crazy shit there already is. What happens when... Imagine, like, being a sub who wants to become someone's literal... Almost dropped my phone. Like, you become a permanent observer in someone's mind who is then your dom, and you can't do anything. And that I can imagine there's some fucking crazy fetishes that are going to develop after this. I can't even... Who knows? But you know that the sex industry is always ahead of the curve on these things. So it's going to start off as a fetish thing. It's going to start off as a fetish thing before everyone else adopts it. This is how it always is. I mean, already VR, some of the best like forward pushing VR technology stuff is being pumped money into by the porn industry. Now, who knows if you think that's a good thing or not? Personally, anything that's pumping money into VR and will let me hopefully lead to me escaping this place, this meat prison, that's a good thing for me. But it's more than just me escaping this meat prison. I guess I can get into it a little bit, but I want this to be its own video. Essentially about how I agree with most or a lot of the preconceptions, or maybe that's not the right word, the foundations of the anarcho-primitivist theory. The main difference being that we disagree on the solutions rather than the actual problems, or why the problems exist. When people say there's a lot of anarcho-primitivist theory that's very important and resonates strongly with me. I was just reading Bob Black today. I've read The Abolition of Work, his essay before, but I was reading the book of his assembled texts, including that one. And he has a very interesting writing style, but more importantly, he's definitely an anarcho-primitivist. Like, he's not super Ted Kaczynski about it, where he's blaming technology specifically for everything. He has more of a Dadaist streak in him, where, but generally he has the his ideal outcome is a return to a sort of hunter-gatherer type thing, or he presents a lot of evidence that would suggest that such a thing would be good, even though he rarely explicitly says how and what to do to get there, which has got me thinking about this as well. See, I agree with a lot of the problems and the reasons of those problems that he points out. Obvious one being the abolition of work. how do you abolish work, and then without completely, like, what system works for abolishing work is immediately, besides a return to hunter-gatherer tribes where there's just, or a ludic society is what I believe he calls it, something based around ludism. Ludism, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've only ever seen it written down. And yeah, that's a great concept. But he sort of assumes that the answer to this is to regress to hunter-gatherer times, which is a possible solution. Although my counter-argument to this is just that there are other ways, potentially with emancipating technology, to achieve such a thing. Similar to what I've been talking about in this video, where the sort of post-humanist thing, where we may no longer at all resemble what we currently are, but what we currently are is depressed as shit, so who really wants to keep that around? And by transforming the very nature of what a person is, and the very nature of what the environment, as in the world, is, we inherently change society, and that is a good thing. So that's basically basically my counter argument to the anarcho-primitivists. But you know, we're both down with the cool stuff, down with the cool anti-work anarchy means blowing things up kind of thing. So that's cool. I'm down with that. You know, I'll say I'd much rather hang out with an anarcho-primitivist than an anarcho-syndicalist, because one of them's just guaranteed to be a lot more fun to be around than the other. And if that's not a judge of how good someone's politics are, then I guess I should just leave. I don't know where I'm going with this. I sort of ran out of things to say about 5 minutes ago, and have been rambling off topic about transhumanism for ages. But that will be a whole edited video, possibly with a script, because I don't want to accidentally say something stupid. But yeah, the transhumanism, posthumanism, primitivism, cybernihilism, accelerationism, ismism, autism, it's all coming. It's all coming. All of the tisms are coming, so get ready for that. Anyway, just have the fun. Have fun imagining what the future virtual space is going to feel like for you. How would it, try and imagine how it would feel to merge consciousnesses with a mob of a million people, or just one other person, or try and like visualize what that would be like to experience, because I find that to be a very interesting thought experiment. But yeah, that's it. Patreon.com/no thank you. The O's are zeros. I desperately need money. This is not true, but it kind of is true actually. I don't want to get too specific. No, I'm not going to talk about that in this video. It's completely out of tone. Anyway, I'm out.